Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Event Industry News Podcast. My name is James Dixon, and our guest today is Louise Findlay-Wilson. Louise is the Managing Director of Energy PR, joins us from their head office in Gloucestershire today. Louise, welcome to the podcast.
Hello there, and thank you for inviting me.
Not a problem at all. Louise is a first-time guest on the Event Industry News podcast, and as I said, runs a company called Energy PR, a public relations company, but with significant experience over 2 decades in working with event clients, event industry clients, both organisers and probably suppliers as well. And I'm sure we'll get to know a little bit more about Louise and her business as today's podcast progresses. So once again, welcome to the show, Louise, and tell us a little bit about the company, first of all. As I said, 20 years in business. How did it come about?
Oh gosh, yes, it makes me feel incredibly old. So thanks for reminding me of the 20 years.
No problem at all.
I set up the agency. I owned another agency before, which I set up when I was really young, and sold that. Set up a energy with a view to it probably being just quite a small affair, and it grew, which was great. And so today it's a team of 9 of us. And we have lots of different clients, but we do have quite a lot of clients and experience, as you say, in the event space, and that's come about by chance, really. You do some work on one show and get a reputation for doing a good job, which is lovely, and it sort of grew from there. But wasn't a plan. But then I think a lot of life isn't a plan, so that's probably quite a healthy thing, really.
Going with the flow.
Absolutely.
When it comes. One of the things that I wanted to ask you when I was looking at today's episode and what we would talk about is a lot of PR agencies will specialise in one particular industry or sector. It's very commonplace. Pharmaceutical, it could be the events industry. Looking at your website and the clients that you're working with, they're not exclusively event related clients. Now, I'm curious to know whether or not you think that puts you in a better position, because I often think that if people work just exclusively in one sector, they can get tunnel vision. They can just see what happens in that industry. How do you draw on the experiences that you have working in other sectors with other clients and bring that into the events industry?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it is a big advantage, actually. I think that if you're solely working in the events space, then you will quite understandably have the perspective of the challenge of getting exhibitors to share their stuff, content to talk about on the conference program. You'll have all of that day-to-day challenge, and you won't have the perspective that we perhaps have because we work the other side of the fence doing PR for everyday businesses that might exhibit at shows. So we know what it's like when they can't get their information together on time, when they look like they're going to miss all those event opportunities. And we therefore, I think because we've got that take on it, I think we're quite sympathetic when dealing with exhibitors and their PR teams. We know how to get the best out of them, which I think is really important. And also we bring a lot of experience from lots of sectors. And I think that there's a great value in drawing on the techniques that work across all sorts of different industries and seeing, well, what can they, how can I apply that within the event space or for that particular market and show? So I think there's a lot of cross-pollination that comes from it as well.
That's interesting. And I guess as well, though, you get to draw on what, in this day and age, platforms work, because we live in, we now work in an age where we talk about platforms, don't we? We talk about different vertical strands and which platforms are we going to utilise and what are going to be most relevant. And I guess you will have come across new ways of not just doing things, but new platforms that you can deliver communications to and draw that into other sectors.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously in terms of social and all the different channels that you can reach audiences with, we've got some really good insights into how to reach different types of decision makers, what excites them, how to measure across some of those platforms, those kinds of things. We also have, I think, because we're working with lots of different industry sectors, we can say if we're then working with a big show organizer who buys a show in a new market for them, I think it's quite handy for them to be able to say to us, actually, do you know anything about this market? It's a new one for us. And the fact that we've worked with clients in lots and lots of different sectors means I think we're quite a valuable addition in terms of market insight and intel for them. So I think it works really well from that as well, actually.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on the fact that you did 20 years and all the rest of it. And I know you jokingly say that makes you, makes you feel like you've been around for a long time. But what that also does is give you a lot of points of reference and experience and seeing things develop and change quite considerably. And I remember going back now 15 or so years to when I started working in the advertising industry, selling advertising as a sales rep, and you would still get, this is 2005, envelopes landing each day with a printed press release and a CD containing all the images that were relevant to that press release. And even things like that, the landscape has changed dramatically, hasn't it, in how we actually deliver those communications? Yeah,
it's utterly different. I look back on how I first did the job when I was starting out, and I cannot imagine how it got done, and yet it did, and it was done to a great extent, within the confines of the way we were working. It all worked fine, but it's the speed with which you can gather and share information, react to an audience, the way you can ride off the back of things so quickly now. I mean, it makes a fantastic difference. But that said, I think there are still some real fundamentals that are true and are the same sort of from way back then to now, which is around nothing actually beats having really good content. I think you needed it back then, and actually you really needed it back then because you didn't have the proliferation of media that you've now got. Today a pretty shoddy PR agency can put out something that's moderate and know, well, there's a whole load of online portals that need content, and they'll be able to persuade somebody somewhere to carry it, and I can probably persuade a client somewhere that this is a piece of successful exposure. Whereas back then, and I'm not endorsing them doing that, but I think that's possible to happen. Whereas back then, because you didn't have all those channels, your stories had to be really good because you were all fighting for a reasonably focused bunch of media that had quite demanding criteria, and if your story didn't work with them, there was no one else who was going to mop it up and give you some kind of results for it. So it instilled a really good lot of discipline in terms of spotting good content, making it work, media relationships, making those work, understanding what people need. I think it was a good old ground for developing your skills. And
it's interesting that you sort of mentioned that side of things and those points in that, it would have been about column inches, wouldn't it? How many column inches did you, how much exposure was there? Was there a picture alongside it? How many words did they carry of the press release? But there are so many different ways of monitoring and sort of identifying what a successful campaign would be. And how would that manifest itself with your event related clients? What demands are they making of you as a PR agency when it comes to actually justifying what they see as a successful campaign or not?
I think when we have a very collaborative relationship with our clients, which I think is the ideal, actually. So when we have a Washup meeting where we're discussing the campaign that's just happened, invariably attached to the show that's just happened, it all happens at the same time. We sit down, review the show, the PR element of the show, how it's all gone, and that review will include, yes, they want some sense of the input. What's the physical sort of work that you did, the number of features you secured, and the number of interview opportunities. There's some sort of metrics like that. But we're also then going to be measuring audience reach, engagement, how that peaks in the build up to the show, what happens during the show. We'll be looking at the sort of sentiment within that. We'll look at the sort of profile of the audiences that we've been reaching. And to be honest, nothing actually beats also feedback from the exhibitors, how they've found it, how supportive they've found it. So that'll be measured quite closely. There's a whole combination of metrics that will give you an indication of how good a job the agency's done for you, and we expect to be judged on all of that, really.
How does the landscape change between a B2B and a B2C show
Yeah.
When you mention things like, press coverage, not just press coverage, but interview opportunities,
Yeah.
is that going to be less prevalent in B2B than it would be in B2C marketplaces?
I think for obviously for B2B, you've got a more focused niche of media that's going to be interested. You still can get interview content around and opportunities around that, but they're going to be quite focused. Whereas with a consumer-facing show, you've got that whole sort of consumer media piece to go for. But that said, the competition for consumer exposure is quite high, and if consumer media covered every show that was out there, they'd be talking about nothing else but shows. So I think it's no easy task to get a show, some consumer, pure, really high profile consumer exposure. I think it's a tough old gig for agencies that are looking after consumer shows. I think it also fundamentally, because your task is to get, help the organizer get footfall. And I think that I think whereas with B2B, I think there's still a really solid incentive for businesses to attend shows. They've got, they're finding it increasingly difficult to get face-to-face with people, and so all those economies of getting face-to-face work really well. I think when you're competing to attract a consumer who's got lots of other possible ways to spend their time, persuading them to go to a show and spend their time there, I think is a proper challenge. And I think you make it work by delving into the niches, identifying all those areas of the audience, groups of the audience that are interested in that niche and are fans and enthusiasts, finding the influencers to work with. All of that you have to work really, really focused and hard, because I think people have got a lot of choice about how they spend their time, and that's fine.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back to something that you mentioned about working with the tools and the means that you have at your disposal now compared to 20 years ago.
Sure.
And the speed of response and speed at which you can get things done now arouse a question in me, which is that has PR become more reactive than it was 20 years ago when you started, because of the way that you can now communicate to people? So instead of just generating content and thinking about content and putting it out there and not so much hoping for a response, but putting it out there, you now have the ability to react to social media posts from a potential visitor, to look at digital content and think, actually, we could expand on that straight away. Has it made the job more reactive than it was?
Yeah, I think it's added a layer to the job. So I think the job has, I don't think anything's been reduced in any other way. I think you still got to do all the other stuff you used to do. I just think you've got this opportunity, actually, fantastic opportunity to interact very directly with the end audience, respond to their interests, pick up on their vibe, if you like, point them towards stuff that you think is of interest to them, ride on the back of the national news agenda and look like you're in touch with what's going on and you're relevant to that of the moment story. So I think there's lots and lots of scope to be incredibly responsive and engaged with the end audience, which is fantastic. I mean, fantastic for show organisers to be able to really operate at the heart of the audience and be engaged with them in that way. So I think it's a challenge for some. I mean, nothing gets away from the pure fact that if you're working on a show, the inputs that you're relying on probably take as long to sort out as they ever did. So you're relying on the show content, the exhibitors to tell you about their stuff they're doing, the conference program to be sorted out and for you to know what that all is, all the show features to be buttoned down and for them to sound interesting. That's all a whole huge amount of work for the organizer to get themselves sorted with that. And I think that hasn't got any faster. I think that's a huge chore for them, a huge task, and you wait for that material to come in. I think where the difference lies is once you've got that material, you can dice and slice it in so many ways now and feed out elements of it to different bits of the audience, different niches, and be really, really tailored, which is fantastic because we're all quite complex creatures. We have interests that we'll go to a show, but there might be a particular aspect of it that really fires us up, and being able to identify that bit and accentuate that bit as far as the audience is concerned, I think is really powerful.
Absolutely. Well, if a new event organizer or event related client comes to you, would they need to come to you with a very clear brief of what they want to achieve, or is there an expectation that you, as the PR company, will need to learn everything about their industry and about their show and what they want to do, and the pressure is on you to find out about them, or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a bit of a two-way street. So we will have people come to us who've not got a brief and they've just got a bit of collateral, a brochure, or the couple of features that they had last year for their show, whatever it might be, and they've got the loosest of, it's not even a brief, that's fine, it's just here's a flavour of what our show's about. And with any client anyway, even if we've got a brief from them, we'll want to sit down with them and absolutely understand, okay, tell me where your show is at, how it went last year, if it's an ongoing event, or if it's brand new. Well, okay, what are the aspirations for this show? Let's understand the audience. Let's understand your exhibitor base. Let's understand the targets, your objectives as an organisation. We want to get under the skin of that, no matter who it is, and then we will go away and work from our end in terms of understanding and knowing the media we need to be working with, the influencers we might want to be working with, coming up with suggestions of topics and things we think will work within that space, that will help with a lot of that, just as part of our proposal development, obviously, for a show. But we're happy for people to have not very much on paper, but as long as they're up for a conversation. That's the crucial thing, is the conversation, where they just can talk us through it all.
I mean, rightly or wrongly, I would suggest that the results that you can achieve as a PR company and as a PR agency are only as good as the information that you've been given by the client that you're working for. So if they're not forthcoming in making sure they're keeping you up to date with new speakers that have been booked to attend to deliver a session, and what giving you a professional biog of that speak, all of that sort of key information that you need, that you can turn into content related activity. Is it fair to say that your results are only as good as the information that you're actually being fed from the organizer? I think to a degree, I think that's really true. I think in most situations it's a collaboration anyway. We're in it with the client, with the exhibition organizer, trying to make their show as successful as we can possibly make it through our part in the process, which is the PR. And so I think they know that. Most clients work quite hard to keep us fed with information. They're not trying to catch us out and go, aha, you're useless without me. See how I proved that point. Well, brilliant. And now we've all suffered as a result. None of them are like that. They want the thing to be a success. So, and to be honest, we can be pretty self-starting. So I think one of our strengths, and I think we've got a few strengths, but I think one of our strengths is that we're very self-starting. So if we know that if a client's just got a speaker lined up, they don't even know what the speaker's going to be talking about, so that's not absolutely buttoned down yet, we can still get moving in terms of pitching content from that expert that can be used to trail the show more generally. The fact that that content from them isn't specifically what they're covering at the show won't really matter, because it's just demonstrating their expertise and their sphere of excellence and acting as a neat trail for the show. So we can do quite a lot to trail a show without the show having all its details buttoned down, actually. We're pretty self-starting. We make the content that we are given work really, really hard. We can go quite a long way without the client having buttoned everything down. I'm happy to say, because the big problem is that a lot of that detail doesn't get decided until really close to the show. And if you're waiting till last 11th hour for everything to be perfect to then do your PR magic, you haven't got much of a PR program. I can tell you. So we've got to crack on before then. So which we do. How extensive do your campaigns manifest themselves when it comes to actually working post-event? Because any event organizer worth their salt will tell you, you can't just do a bit beforehand, deliver the event, and then go quiet for 9 months and then ramp it up 2 months before next year. Music festivals are a great example. The best ones are constantly delivering content on their social media feeds. How has that has that changed significantly, irrespective of the technology that you've now got to deliver the content? Has that changed at all? Have you always been an advocate of continually, putting messages out there?
Yeah, I've always felt that, and I've always felt that it's pretty important to keep that audience. It's much easier to keep the audience engaged on side, stay relevant to them, and then ramp things up as your event gets closer. I can completely understand how a lot of show organisers don't really want to do an awful lot of that, because their revenue is all around the show. That's where they make their money, and they want to invest as much as they can around the show itself, and kind of anything that's after the event feels like, oh well, I'm that's money I'm never going to get back, and on a show that's been, it's rather than seeing it as building the brand for the next one that you're going to do. So I completely get how there's a tension there between what's an ideal practice and the commercial realities of being a show organizer. But yeah, we definitely do quite a bit of post-show work with clients. So we'll keep the content going. For some, we'll carry on managing social channels after the show has happened, particularly if there are other events that are competitive to them, that are sort of coming up behind them. Then they'll want to keep the buzz around their event going whilst those rival shows are going on, and that's absolutely fine. We also will do, there might be content that they're wanting to share on their portals that's ongoing, sort of interviews with people who are involved in the event, or sort of the headline speakers, or to keep the halo of sort of good news and interest going after the event is finished. So we'll do quite a lot of that, but there is a natural lull between the end of one show and the start of the other from a PR point of view, and there will be a little bit of a quiet time where the client tends to carry on looking after the social channels themselves. The media activity will quieten down quite a lot in comparison to then that build up, which we kick off with again.
A lot of bigger trade shows, or not even trade shows, sorry, a lot of bigger events, and it could be an exhibition or a conference, whatever, will have an in-house either PR team or PR person. Have you come across clients before who have said to you, well, why do we need an agency to come in and help us? We've got somebody in-house. But when you do get that foot in the door and you are asked to work alongside an in-house team, is there ever a conflict there? Is it a sharing of ideas? Can it be tricky?
It's not tricky at all, really. I think if we don't tend to try and sort of bully our way into where there's a setup and say, oh, well, that's, what you're doing is dreadful and let us make it all better. For the most part, we're called in because the internal person, often they're not a pure PR person. To be honest, they're a marketing manager on a show, and they've got a lot of responsibilities that they've got to worry about. They're sorting out all the biz prom, the email marketing, the talking to all the media partners. That's a massive job. I mean, nobody works harder than an event manager, an event marketer, the show director. Those people are, they've got a huge raft of work to get through. So I think for them to be able to pass off a big chunk of responsibility that's all around the media piece, and where there's lots of relentless deadlines, and it's just like, that's a whole bunch of deadlines I don't need to worry about. That's a whole bunch of conversations I don't need to have, because I can pass it off to this team that's acting like an extension of my internal team. I think they find that quite useful. I think if somebody was a pure PR person in-house, we still would work very successfully with them. You just agree who's doing what, and they're presumably getting you in because they haven't got the bandwidth to do it all themselves. So they're usually pretty grateful for the chance to pass stuff off to someone else.
Yeah, when it comes to things like social media, a lot of businesses now, big companies will have having a social media manager is not an unusual job title to see nowadays. How different is there a difference between managing social media effectively and delivering good quality PR and results via a PR strategy, or are they one and the same? Do they interlink, or should they be treated as separate entities?
My start point is always, what are you trying to achieve as an organisation? And so I think you say, okay, who am I trying to reach? What do I want them to do? What do they need to think about my show in order to turn up? That's the kind, or in order to exhibit, whatever it is you're worrying about. And I think the channel that you reach them through will vary, but the logic behind it all is the same. And I think therefore the social activity will be part of the same puzzle. You're trying to shift a heart and mind, get into somebody's diary, get into their plans, so that they think, yes, on that date I'm going to be there doing that, because that sounds exciting, it sounds interesting, it's and I think whether it's social media delivering some content and interaction and wooing the person to make them think that, or something in a more mainstream media sense that does that as well, I think it's all very complementary. So I think there's a natural fit between the two, because you won't use exactly the same content obviously on both, but the themes can be similar. You might do something in one sense and then have a sort of twist on the way you play it out on social channels, which makes it work really nicely. And we'll work very happily alongside somebody in-house who's managing social channels. So if they've got a social media manager who's doing the do across the board, they're invariably looking after a number of shows. In my experience, they've got very few shows will afford a person that does nothing but social for a show. That's quite rare these days, I'd say. And so they're probably juggling a number of agendas, and so they will be very grateful of some extra support, particularly during the pure heat of the show. When the show's happening, a couple of months before, during the show, a couple of months afterwards, they'll probably be quite grateful for some additional action from someone who's very closely wedded to all of the content, knows what's going on in the media, knows all the news hooks. We're perfectly placed to kind of feed that machine, I think. So I think they're quite happy to have that support.
And finally, before we wrap up today's episode of the podcast, if we ignore for a second the how, as in digital communication, so using laptops, mobile phones, tablets to communicate, so the way that we send that message, are there any new innovations to be had within PR, and have there been any new innovations, or fundamentally does it come back to what you said quite in the beginning, which is it's all about the content?
I think it's a really interesting point. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of things you can do now because of the channels and because of the technology, but I do think the fundamental that you have to tap into, whichever way you do it, is I'm expecting this person to spend that amount of time at this physical location on this date. And whether it's a B2B or a B2C show, you've got to have some way of resonating with them so that they think, that's fantastic. And yes, there are all sorts of techniques and tools now where they can share the fact they're going to be at a show so that everyone else knows, and you can do lots of initiatives to encourage groups to gather at your show and do special initiatives around your show so that you get those groupings there together and playing on that sort of whole sort of camaraderie of the group that might be assembled online. But the fundamental is you are battling with human nature, and we haven't changed that much in 20 years. I tell you, we still all feel very busy, time poor. Why would I care? Why would I go? Okay, and that's still the magic you've got to master.
Absolutely. Our guest today on the podcast is Louise Findlay-Wilson. Louise is the Managing Director of Energy PR. energypr.co.uk is their website if you want to find out a little bit more about them. And I think on Twitter it's at energypr, as simple as that, I think.
That's it. You've got it.
Twitter. Thank you very much to Louise for joining us today, talking about PR strategy, working not just exclusively with event industry clients, but with significant experience of working with shows and suppliers, and just tapping a little bit into the mindset of the PR person today, and hopefully giving us all a little bit of a better understanding about that, how a really difficult task is achieved within the industry. Louise, thanks very much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you're watching the video of today's podcast, then Podbean or iTunes or whatever your favorite or chosen podcast download app is, head over there and you'll find the Event Industry News podcast in audio form to download to your mobile devices, listen to on your commute to and from work, or if you're out and about somewhere and you've got 20 minutes to tap into one of our podcasts. The flip side to that, of course, is if you are listening to today's podcast, go over to eventindustrynews.com. All of the podcasts are there, available to watch back as video versions. And whilst you're on the website, you can also check out the latest news features and content that's on Event Industry News. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. My name's James Dixon. Our guest today has been Louise Findlay-Wilson, and we'll see you on the next edition of the podcast. Thanks very much. Goodbye.